It now being 2 p.m, we'll move to question time, and I call Senator Ruston.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Wong. Minister, how many suburbs chosen as part of your solar battery grant program are in Labor-held seats?
Minister Wong.
Thank Senator Ruston for the question, and thank you, President. I assume that should actually be addressed to me as the Minister representing the Minister for Climate Change, but I will check who has responsibility for that program and the status of that program and where approvals under that program are at. I don't have personal knowledge of that, and you wouldn't, I frankly, expect me to. But I would make this point. Today we have. I'll take it on notice.
Senator Birmingham.
I'll take it on notice, and we will return. I'll return with some further information from the relevant minister, as is appropriate. But I would make this point: what we are seeing, what we saw today in the chamber, was the majority of this chamber vote for a plan to get to net zero. Senator Ruston, you support net zero, don't you? Do you? I assume so. I assume even the moderates in the Liberal Party still support it.
Senator Wong,
I'm very happy to give you time to talk.
Please resume your seat. Senator Ruston.
Yeah. On direct relevance, President, if the Minister doesn't know the answer and has taken the question on notice, and she doesn't wish to be relevant to the question in her additional comments, I would ask her to perhaps just take it on notice.
Thank you, Senator Ruston. That's not a point of order. The Minister has taken it on notice and she's entitled to continue her remarks. Senator Wong.
Thank you. Certainly, if I do recall that we had a very clear election commitment to roll out community batteries across Australia. We announced a number of batteries as election commitments. I understand that the proposals for the first 58 locations are currently being assessed via the Government Business Grants Hub after submissions closed in January. I also am advised that commitments were made in a number of seats, coalition seats, including Leichhardt and Bowman. But I would make this point. Senator Ruston, and I know she's got a lot on her mind, but Senator Ruston comes in here. Order.
Senator Cash. Minister, please resume your seat. Senator Cash, I had just called the chamber to order. Thank you. Minister, please continue.
Thank you, President. Senator Ruston, it would be useful if those of you on that side who actually believed in the net zero commitment you made to South Australians come in here and tell us how you would get to it.
The time for answering has expired. Senator Ruston, first supplementary.
Equitably in all of the electorates. Thank you, President. My second question to the Minister, it would be keen to understand if you could advise the Senate on how many sites under the Improving Mobile Coverage round of the Mobile Black Spots program are in Labor-held seats.
Thank you, Senator Ruston. Minister.
That is, well, if I'm repping the PM, certainly I'll take that on notice. I think from memory that would be in the communications portfolio, so that should have been asked of the appropriate minister. But I'm happy to return now. To community batteries. The Community Batteries for Household Solar program will maximise the benefits for Australia's rooftop solar transformation, supporting the grid and providing shared storage for up to 10,000 households. The first 48 community batteries, which were announced publicly as election commitments, will be delivered by the business grant hubs. The remaining 342 batteries with unspecified locations will be delivered by ARENA, with applications to open later this year. I hesitate to take that interjection from Senator Watt. So I think from that, Senator Ruston, you would see that, yes, there are 48 which were announced as election commitments. There are also 342 which are, as I am advised, subject to—
The time for answering has expired. Senator Ruston, second supplementary.
Thank you, President. On the 29th of July last year, your Finance Minister tweeted, "Taxpayer money must be spent in the best interests of the community, not an election outcome." Isn't this statement, along with countless others that have been made by your leader and other Labor ministers, a case of complete hypocrisy when the answer to the two previous questions is 3 out of every 4 recipients in the solar battery program or the mobile black spot program are miraculously in Labor seats.
Thank you, Senator Ruston. Minister.
That is incorrect. Senator Ruston, the assertion in the question, I'm addressing your question.
Minister, please direct your comments
through the chair. Senator Ruston is being very loose with the truth in her question, because I told her 48 batteries announces election commitments. The remaining 342 to be delivered by ARENA with applications to open later this year. So, this is the problem with drafting a final SUP without listening to the question.
Minister Wong, please resume your seat. Senator Cash.
Chair, point of order in relation to the minister should be directing her comments, as you stated, through the chair and not pointing directly at Senator Ruston.
Thank you, Senator Cash, and I'll remind the minister to direct her comments to the chair.
Thank you. I'm very happy to address you, President, but I am somewhat amused at Senator Cash, who is well known for a lot of pointing in this chamber, telling me about pointing. But if Senator Ruston wishes me to speak to you, I will. And the policy point I am making, Senator Cash, I'll take that interjection. The policy point I will make is that I have told you that the numbers that you have asserted are incorrect, but you persist in putting misinformation in front of the Senate because you want to make a political point. Well, it's not founded in fact.
Has expired. Order. And I draw to the attention of honourable senators the presence in the President's Gallery of the Australian Political Exchange's 24th delegation from the Socialist Republic of Vietnam. On behalf of all senators, I wish you a warm welcome to Australia and in particular to the Senate. Senator Payman.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Climate Change and Energy, Senator Wong. In the last hour, the Senate has agreed to the government's Safeguard Mechanisms legislation, which is another landmark in the Albanese government's proactive approach to take action on climate change. Minister, how are the Albanese government safeguard reforms a step forward for the nation's action on climate change?
Minister Wong.
Well, I thank Senator Payman for her question, and I thank all of my colleagues on this side, the Greens and members of the crossbench, who supported this historic legislation. And one of the things that those opposite, and I know they are fools returning to their folly over and over again, one of the things that those opposite seem not to have understood is the Australian people at the last election returned a parliament, not just a government, but a parliament supportive of action on climate change. And those opposite are still stuck in the fights of years past. And in fact, I listened to some of the debate which Senator McAllister had so extraordinarily well. And I thought, I remember this. I remember Senator Joyce standing down there asking the same questions. I remember the then Senator McDonald. I remember a whole range of those. Senator Minchin, who said that climate change was a left-wing conspiracy to deindustrialise the Western world. I mean, these people have not changed. They have not changed. And what I'd say to those opposite is this. I'd say two things. The first is this legislation is one part, not the only part, but an critical and important part of ensuring Australia can thrive and prosper in a world where the world is moving to net zero by 2050. And Senator Canavan, despite your best efforts, and I know you're not going to be worried about me talking at you, Senator Canavan, despite your best efforts, the coalition did sign off.
Senator Wong, please resume your seat. Senator McKenzie.
I ask you to draw the minister to preface her comments through the chair. It's not about whether Senator Canavan minds or not. It's actually the standing orders, and it's about being respectful to the chair.
Senator McKenzie, when you call a point of order, and I have reminded senators of this earlier in the week, please state your point of order without making a statement. I will remind the Minister to direct her comments to the Chair. Minister.
Nobody wants to have fun anymore. President, as Senator Canavan, no matter how much Senator Canavan tried, those in his party still signed up to net zero by 2050. At least that's what they told the Australian people. At least that's what they told the Australian people. But you know what? They have no plan to deliver it. They're not even interested in a plan.
Thank you, Minister. The time for answering has expired. Senator Payman, first supplementary. Senator Payman, please resume your seat. There's too much disorder in the chamber and noise. Senator Payman, please continue.
Thank you, President. After a decade of policy delay, denial and dysfunction, how will these reforms deliver overdue policy certainty? What has been the response to the Parliament's progressing these reforms?
Minister.
I thank the Senator for her question, and it's a question that goes to the heart of why this reform is needed. It goes to the heart of why this reform is good, not only for action on climate, but also for the Australian economy and for Australian business. And one of the irrationalities from those opposite has been that they have misunderstood for over 15 years the importance of certainty in markets. And that fact, the 22 energy policies that they put in place, which ensured there was no investment certainty and that the private sector would not invest in accordance with its desires much of the time, which is why we have this bizarre situation where most of the business community is not where the coalition are. Now, that really must be hard for the party that thinks they're the party of business. And what I've noticed in some of the debate, through you, President, what I've noticed in some of the debate is they seem to say that somehow it's because business don't understand.
It's has expired. Senator Payman, second supplementary.
The Minister for Climate Change and Energy has said that these reforms aren't just a plan for the climate, they are a plan for the economy. Minister, what will these reforms mean for investment and the economy?
Minister.
I pick up where I left off, President. The reality is the investor community, the business community, is well ahead of those opposite. Well ahead of those opposite. And it says something about the delusion of a party that goes to an election saying, we had 22 policies, but actually we're up to for 2050. We had no investment certainty, so there was no investment in the energy sector. But guess what? We now, after the election, we know better than all of the investor community, all of the business representatives, all of the businesses in this country who are seeking certainty from the parliament and from the government. And can I say what an abrogation of responsibility it has been that a party of government has left it to the crossbench and the Greens, and we welcome their support. But what does it say about you? What does it say about you as a party of government that says we support 2050, the coalition, you're nowhere?
Thank you, Minister. The time for answering has expired. Order. Order. I also draw to Senators' attention the members of the Engagement Referendum Working Group who are in the Visitors' Gallery. Senator Nampijinka-Price.
Oh, how appropriate. Thank you, Madam President. My question is to the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Wong. Minister, can you please outline to the Senate what mechanism the Labor Party intends to use for determining a person's Aboriginality for the purposes of voting for or serving on the proposed Voice to Parliament body?
Minister Wong.
Can I first acknowledge the leaders in the chamber and
Senator Rennick.
I would have hoped, Senator Rennick, that regardless of your views about the Voice, you might acknowledge leadership and respect leadership, and say to those leaders of First Nations who are here, we have appreciated the leadership you have shown with your peoples and in engagement with the government, with the parliament, with the cabinet and with the Prime Minister. And it has been, I think, a very important and frankly very moving process of working through these issues to get to the point we are today. Senator Price, I'm frankly quite disappointed in that question.
Minister, please resume your seat. Senator Cash, I have a senator on her feet. Senator Nampijinka-Price.
Thank you. I'd just like to correct the senator that my appropriate title is Senator Nampijinka-Price.
Thank you, Senator. Minister.
I apologise, Senator Nampijinka-Price. I am disappointed in the question. It's a question that I've heard from those who seek to undermine indigeneity. And I'm not suggesting—
Order. Order. Order.
But I accept you wish to put that to me, and I will answer it. I'm advised that there is a three-part test, which is widely accepted and has not changed. I'm advised that the Australian government generally applies the following common law criteria for the
Senator
purpose
McCarthy.
of determining eligibility for First Nations-specific services, and they are that a person is Aboriginal and/or of Torres Strait Islander descent, identifies as an Aboriginal and/or Torres Strait Islander and is accepted as such by the community in which they live or have previously lived. I'm advised this is a widely accepted test by government agencies, by First Nations organisations and community organisations, and if I may say, it would appear to be common sense.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Nampijinka-Price, first supplementary.
Thank you. Can you please, Senator, please confirm with me, will the Albanese government follow at all the example of the South Australian government and allow people to simply make a statutory declaration of their own Aboriginality?
Thank you, Senator. Minister Wong.
Thank you, President. And in response, I'd make the point that I think I have responded in—
Senator Ruston. Order. Order. It is disrespectful to keep calling out across the chamber, especially when the minister is on her feet answering. Minister, please continue.
Thank you, President. I refer to my previous answer, which I think goes to these issues, but the senator raises what has occurred in South Australia. And in South Australia there has been, and Thomas Mayo and others who are involved, and others who are involved in South Australia would attest to the importance of the announcement on Sunday, in which I think there was bipartisan support from memory. Is that right? And I should— Mr. Aegis is here. Thank you for your work too. It points to the sort of unity across the community. That this process, when done well,
has expired. Senator Nampijinka-Price, second supplementary.
Thank you. Is the Albanese government concerned about people taking advantage of the criteria for establishing Aboriginality, and will they consider strict requirements for those who wish to vote or serve on The Voice?
Thank you, Senator Nampijinka-Price. Minister.
Again, I've answered the broader— I've answered the—
Minister, please resume your seat. Senator Ruston, I called you during the last question. I'm going to call you again. You are being disorderly and disrespectful. Minister, please continue.
Thank you. I've answered the approach the government takes as a matter of course in the response to the first question, but I would make this point, that the proposed wording of the constitutional change makes it clear, amongst other things, that the structure and process associated with The Voice and its composition would be the subject of the determination by the Parliament. So obviously, were the Australian people to agree to support the constitutional change that has been proposed, members and senators will have engagement on some of those issues, including the issues that Senator Nampijinka-Price raises today.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Shoebridge.
Thank you, President. My question is to Minister Wong in her capacity representing the Prime Minister. Minister, I'm asking this question on behalf of millions of Australians, but also Julian Assange's father, John Shipton, who went to San Diego in mid-March hoping to hear that his son would be released. Did the Prime Minister raise the ongoing prosecution and detention of Julian Assange with President Biden during their meeting on 14 March this year?
Thank you, Senator Shoebridge. Minister.
Thank you, and thank you to Senator Shoebridge for his question. I'd make a few points about Mr Assange. I understand that there is strong interest in the case. There is a depth of community sentiment, and we have made clear publicly before the election and since that the government's view is that Mr Assange's case has dragged on too long and should be brought to a close. It is not generally my practice to give chapter and verse of everything that is said in every diplomatic communications, but in the interest of transparency on this issue, I have said that I have personally expressed this view, the view that is that Mr Assange's case has dragged on long enough and should be brought to a close, to the governments of the United States and the government of the United Kingdom, and I will continue to do so. The Prime Minister has also made clear in the Parliament, I'd refer you to his answers, that he has raised this case at the appropriate levels. What I would say is this, and you would know this, Senator Shoebridge, as a lawyer. We are not able, as an Australian government, to intervene in another country's legal or court processes. Well, it is true. It is true, and you know that you would understand. Senator Shoebridge, there is a thing called the rule of law. There is a principle called the separation of powers. Well, and no amount of bellowing at me from that end of the chamber is going to change the fact that a court has to determine the legal process. So we can raise these issues as I have and as the Prime Minister have, but we are not able to alter the judicial processes of another country.
Order. Minister Wong, please resume your seat. Senator Wong. Senator Whish-Wilson, those comments are disrespectful and disorderly, and I would ask you not to call out. Senator Shoebridge.
Thank you, President.
Sorry, I thought you were on a point of order. Thank you.
Senator Whish-Wilson, how would you propose that we do that? Send the Australian Army into a court? I mean, really?
Minister, please resume your seat. Senator Whish-Wilson.
Seeing as I was asked a direct question,
Senator Whish-Wilson, please resume your seat.
I can respond.
Senator Whish-Wilson, please resume your seat. Senator Shoebridge, first supplementary.
Thank you, President. Minister, the Prime Minister has said, and I think you have too, enough is enough. And the Prime Minister said he wants a resolution of this matter, but this, to use his words, requires quiet diplomacy. How could a conversation between President Biden, PM Albanese and PM Sunak, which he was in just 2 weeks ago, not be the most important kind of quiet diplomacy to use to free Julian Assange? And why wasn't it used?
Thank you, Senator Shoebridge. Minister Wong.
That isn't what I said, and you've made a set of assertions there which may or may not be true. And I would again say that we have, at the Prime Minister's level and at Foreign Minister level, been very clear in our views that this matter has dragged on too long and it should be brought to a close. But I again make the point that there is a legal process which is in accordance with the tradition of the separation of powers, which I regard as an important part of democracy. It is not something that the Australian government can resolve. Having said that, it is appropriate.
Minister Wong. Senator Whish-Wilson, I called you to order twice. I expect you to come to order. Minister, did you wish to continue?
What we are doing what we can between government and government, but there are limits to what that diplomacy can achieve.
Thank you, Minister. The time for answering has expired. Senator Shoebridge, second supplementary.
Thank you, President. It is a simple question, Minister, that Julian Assange's family are asking, and as Australian citizens they deserve an answer to. Did their Prime Minister ask President Biden to drop the United States prosecution and allow Julian to come home when they met just a few short weeks ago? Please answer the question.
Thank you, Senator Shoebridge.
The Prime Minister has made his views clear about this matter having been dragged on too long, but I again would make this point I would make this point that whilst we are doing what we can between government and government, there are limits until Mr Assange has concluded the legal processes. I think it is that there are legal processes which are still on foot. Well,
Order,
which cannot,
Senator Rice.
and
Order.
I also.
Minister, please resume your seat. Senator Shoebridge.
Thank you, President. My point of order is relevance. My question was about a meeting between the President and the Prime Minister, not about court proceedings, but about a meeting between the President and the Prime Minister. And the Minister is refusing to address it.
Thank you, Senator Shoebridge. I believe the Minister is being relevant to your question. Minister.
I did respond to it, and I'm actually trying to be helpful. And if you perhaps listened to what I'm saying, Senator Shoebridge, what I'm saying to you is that whilstsoever there are legal proceedings on foot, it is very difficult for there to be resolution between governments. I think that is an observation of fact.
Minister,
there are some countries.
Minister, please resume your seat. Senator Shoebridge, this is not a debate. Senator Shoebridge. Order. Senator Shoebridge. Senator Shoebridge. Order on my left and my right. I've called you to order. This is not an opportunity to debate. There are other opportunities during our sitting for you to make whatever comments you want. You ask the question and you listen with respect. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you. I would also make the point, because the Senator mentioned Mr Assange's family. I have engaged with his family.
Thank you, Minister Wong. Senator Sterle.
Thank you, President. I've got a ripper for the Minister for Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry. After a decade of inaction of climate, thanks to those opposite, the Albanese government is taking decisive action to combat challenges of climate change. The passage of the Safeguard Mechanism legislation delivers landmark reforms that will result in the reduction of 205 million tonnes of greenhouse gas emissions to 2030. Minister, why does Australian agriculture support action on climate change?
Minister Watt.
Thank you, President, and thank you, Senator Sterle. It's really nice to get a question about agriculture. And I've had questions from Senator Sterle, Senator Coney, Senator Watt, all sorts of senators over here, but never get a question from the National Party about agriculture. It seems that they've given up. Well, due to the Senate's efforts today, Australia is one step closer to reaching net zero by 2050, not just towards meeting the target, but to ensuring our economy is geared up to take advantage of the opportunities that will come with it. The Safeguard Mechanism reforms passed by the Senate today will deliver 205 million tonnes of emissions reduction by 2030. So after 10 long years and a couple more days of delay and dysfunction, Australia now has sensible reforms to ensure Australia's largest emitters reduce their emissions while remaining competitive in a decarbonising global economy. We know Senator Canavan and his mates will never accept reality. We know they'll never open their eyes to what is happening around the world. But the rest of the world is moving on. I'm telling you, it's moving on. And that is fantastic news for farmers, and along with everyone else in our agriculture, fisheries and forestry sectors. Because the truth is, as much as the former Country Party used to recognise, our farmers are on the front line of climate change in this country. Whether it's repeated flooding, more intense fires, more severe cyclones, larger hail or more prolonged drought, the impacts of climate-induced disasters are hitting our farms and their bottom line, driving up the price of fruit and veggies for consumers. In fact, we know from ABARES modelling that climate change has reduced annual average farm profits by 23%, or around $29,000 per farm, due to seasonal weather changes over the last 20 years. It is well beyond time for this country to take action, and we're not telling the ag industry something they don't already agree with. Whether it's the National Farmers Federation, the Meat and Livestock Association, Dairy Australia, the Red Meat Advisory Council, they've all moved on, and one of these days the National Party might too.
Thank you, Minister. The time for answering has expired. Senator Sterle, first supplementary.
Thank you, President. The Australian people, businesses and farmers have long been calling for action on climate change. What opportunities will the Albanese government's strong action on climate change create for Australian farmers, Minister?
Minister Watt.
Thanks again, Senator Sterle. I think you've asked 5 times as many questions about agriculture that the National Party have since the election, but you know that's just the kind of guy you are. The latest ABARES figures show that on the back of good conditions for the past few seasons, farm incomes are at record highs. And while obviously this isn't the case for everyone, on the whole it is a good time to be in the agriculture sector. But imagine how high those incomes could have been if action was taken on climate change 20 years ago, not today. And as I say, we know what difference it would have made. ABARES tells us that farm incomes have suffered by 23% due to seasonal climate weather and weather conditions. And we also know that climate change presents an ongoing risk to farmers, especially given the inevitability that drought is around the corner. And that's why having a diversified income is vital for our nation's farmers, and increased activity in the carbon market will provide that opportunity, along with the activity in the nature repair market, which will be able to happen now that Labor has introduced legislation to make it happen.
The time for answering has expired. Senator Sterle, second supplementary.
Thank you, President. Under the previous government, climate inaction was a deliberate policy choice, and as a result we saw increases in emissions. What risk do farmers face if we do not take action on climate change?
Minister Watt.
Thank you, President. Thank you again, Senator Sterle. Of course, there are long-term natural impacts that come with not addressing climate change, and I see them almost every day in my role as Emergency Management Minister. In fact, of course, I was recently in the Gulf of Carpentaria after the floods there, and there were more media reports this morning suggesting that early estimates from Gulf flooding are that tens of thousands of head of cattle could have perished. And these are the events we will see more often if we don't take action on climate change. But it's not just those economic and environmental impacts that farmers face as a result of climate change. It is crucial to our position as a trusted trading partner around the globe that we continue to increase our sustainability effort. Who could forget those embarrassing images of former Prime Minister Scott Morrison giving an empty speech to an empty room at COP26 in Glasgow? Anyone who knows anything about agriculture and trade knows that we need to take more action on climate change to shore up those international markets, and I'm surprised the National Party doesn't get it.
Has expired. Senator Tyrrell.
Thank you, President. My question is for the Minister representing the Minister for Infrastructure, Senator Watt. With a $240 million proposed to be spent by your government for the Hobart Stadium, you could lift rent assistance for nearly 40,000 Tasmanians by 40%. If those 40,000 people were meeting with you this week, like the stadium lobbyists were, what do you think they'd want you to do?
Thank you, Senator Tyrrell. Minister Watt.
Thanks, President, and thank you, Senator Tyrrell. I think, Senator Tyrrell, despite the very few number of questions you have the opportunity to ask, I think you've asked me more questions than the National Party has since the election as well. And it's also always a pleasure to answer your questions. Senator Tyrrell, obviously the issue around the Hobart Stadium has been a matter of some debate within the Tasmanian community, and having spent some time in Tasmania, I know that there are very strong views about this on both sides of the debate. Our government is working with the Tasmanian government around this proposal. Of course, the Tasmanian government, I think on the whole, are strongly supportive of it, but we're very conscious that there are a range of views on this topic. But, Senator Tyrrell, I guess what I'd put to you is that wherever we end up on the issue of the Hobart Stadium, it doesn't mean that we can't also be taking action when it comes to rental affordability and the housing pressures that Tasmanians are undoubtedly under. I can take you through some of what we're doing about rental affordability, but in the end, the answer to rental stress is a sustained boost to the supply of homes to rent and a substantial investment in new and affordable houses. And Senator Tyrrell, you won't be surprised to hear me say then that the best thing the Senate can do is back the Housing Australia Future Fund. I'm actually not across, Senator Tyrrell, what your position is on that issue, but I certainly know what some other Tasmanians who you're sitting right near over there, what their view is on it. Hello, Senator Whish-Wilson. And it'd be a really good thing if Senator Whish-Wilson, Senator McKim and every other Tasmanian senator joined with the government to back the Housing Australia Future Fund so that we can have that investment in affordable housing, in social housing, in housing for veterans, in housing for domestic violence victims in Tasmania and in every other part of the country. It is odd that we have the Greens and the Coalition joining together as the new coalition in Australia to block affordable housing investment.
Minister Watt. Order. Order. Senators Brown and Duniam. Senator Tyrrell, first supplementary.
Thank you, President. So the Hobart Stadium's own business case says the project will lose $2 for every dollar it makes. When the project itself is telling you it's going to lose all of your money twice over, and you think that represents good value, what's your argument against raising the rate of job seeker?
Minister Watt.
Thank you, President, and thanks again, Senator Tyrrell. I probably can't add a huge amount to my previous answer in terms of the Hobart Stadium. As I say, it is something that our government is in negotiation with both the AFL and the Tasmanian government on, and I'm sure that in due course our position will be finalised and then determined. But again, Senator Tyrrell, I do know how we can assist Tasmanians who are doing it tough through the affordable housing crisis that is undoubtedly the case across the country and including in your state. And I know, Senator Tyrrell, that you are a strong supporter of greater investment in social and affordable housing, and that's something that we would, of course, like to continue working with you on. All I can do is say that the best solution that we have before us is a policy that the government took to the election to create this Housing Australia Future Fund and can get going as soon as the Senate passes it to build that housing.
Thank you, Minister. The time for answering has expired. Senator Tyrrell, second supplementary.
Thank you, President. Budgets are about priorities. You could build 2,900 homes in Tasmania with the funding slated for the government spend on the Hobart Stadium. This would be enough to give every single homeless Tasmanian a place to call home. What's your government's priority? Put in a roof on a stadium, that retracts, by the way, or put in a roof over their heads?
Thank you, Senator Tyrrell. Minister Watt.
Thank you, Senator Tyrrell, again. Well, of course, any budget that the federal government brings down undertakes and provides funding for a broad range of activities. And I'm very confident that when this budget is finalised, and I know Senator Gallagher in particular has been putting a huge effort into framing it, it will deal with a number of really important challenges that Australians are facing, whether it be in Tasmania or elsewhere around the country. Of course, assisting people with cost of living relief will be a real centrepiece of this budget, and providing more investment in housing will be as well, provided we can get that legislation passed. Now, Senator Tyrrell, I'm sure you're aware, but we are already taking action on affordable housing in Tasmania. 48 new affordable homes being provided in Launceston in partnership with Community Housing Limited, 181 new homes in northwest Tasmania funded by the National Housing Finance and Investment Corporation. So there's a lot of action happening. We know there needs to be more, and that's what that housing fund's about.
Has expired. Senator Birmingham.
President, my question is to the Minister for Trade, Senator Farrell. INPEX is one of the most important foreign investors in Australia. Shortly before question time today, INPEX's global CEO, Takayuki Ueda, spoke at an event hosted by Resources Minister Madeleine King. Ueda-san said in his speech, and I quote, about the government's gas market policies that we are concerned that market intervention will only compound the situation of price challenges. Price intervention is likely to discourage investment in exploration and production, while simultaneously driving up demand. The energy policy environment in Australia today appears to be driven almost by ideology and domestic concerns, that the investment climate in Australia appears to be deteriorating. I ask Senator Farrell, as the Minister responsible for investment, how much does the government believe its interventions will reduce investment in Australia, and does the Albanese Labor government accept responsibility for the deterioration in Australia's investment reputation?
Time for asking has expired. Minister Farrell.
Zero. Zero is the zero impact on our relations with zero. Seriously, zero. Zero is the answer. It won't have any impact on our international reputation or our reliability or our stability as a supplier of, amongst other things, gas. I've followed the INPEX story in Australia very closely for a long period of time, since my great friend, Mr. Paul Henderson, shook hands with Mr. Kitamura all those years ago to start the process of building one of the great Japanese investments in this country to sit and watch those gas ships go out of Darwin Harbour on their way to supplying something like 10% of Japan's gas needs is a wonderful sight, and I can recommend it to anybody. I met with the gentleman that you referred to, and I've met with Mr. Kitamura. In fact, I had the privilege late last year of awarding Mr. Kitamura an Order of Australia at the Australian Embassy in Tokyo. We're a democracy. We're a democracy just like Japan, and companies in Japan can express points of view that don't always agree with the government of the day, or in fact other business.
Thank you, Minister. The time for answering has expired. Senator Birmingham, first supplementary.
Ueda-san also said that, quote, Australia is competing for global investment, and the changes we are seeing to Australian policy settings will choke investment and strangle the expansion of LNG projects in this country. The consequences of these well-intentioned policies will be the increasing energy demand in our region will be met by coal and not by natural gas. Senator Farrell, will Labor's gas market intervention increase demand for coal and, as Ueda-san says, make net zero by 2050 an impossible task?
Thank you, Senator Birmingham. Minister.
Thank you, President. Thank you, Senator Birmingham. No is the answer to that. No is the answer to that question. We are making sensible decisions in the interests of Australian consumers. Now, after 10 years of doing nothing about these sorts of issues, you left the electricity system in a complete mess.
Minister Farrell, please resume your seat. Order on my left. Calling out, shouting out is disorderly, and I'd ask you to stop. Minister, please continue.
President, and Senator Canavan knows what I'm saying is exactly correct.
Thank you, Senator Farrell. Senator McKenzie.
Point of order, Chair. Going to Odger's explanation to the rules of debate around Standing Order 193, ministers are to direct their comments through the chair, and Senator Farrell was yelling and pointing at Senator Canavan rather than respectfully answering the question through you.
Senator McKenzie. Let me first of all remind all senators that shouting out across the chamber— Senator Canavan, shouting out across the chamber is incredibly disorderly. That's the first point I'd make. The second point I'd make is that Senator Farrell was directing his comments to me, except for a slight deviation, and I will remind him to direct his comments to the chair, but I'd also remind other senators not to keep calling out to a minister on their feet who's answering a question. Minister Farrell.
Thank you, President, and thank you for that protection from Senator Canavan. Look, we were left with a situation where the potential was that, as a result of those 10 years of neglect in the electricity sector by the former government—
Minister Farrell, please resume your seat. Senator Birmingham.
Point of order on direct relevance. The question actually related to the gas market interventions, and particularly the question went to the observation by one of the largest foreign investors in this country as whether those interventions would increase demand for coal. I ask you to draw the minister to the question.
Senator Birmingham, the minister answered the question when he first stood. That's my understanding. He has answered your question directly. Minister Farrell.
Thank you, President. And my first comment was a direct answer to the question. And I don't, with all due respect to INPEX, I don't agree with their assessment of the situation. Now,
thank you, Minister. The time for answering has expired. Senator Birmingham, second supplementary.
Ueda-san also said, quote, on the geopolitical front, Australia's quiet quitting of the LNG business has potentially very sinister consequences. The question of who will replace Australian supply in the market is front and centre. Alarmingly, the inconvenient truth is most likely that Russia, China and Iran will fill the void." End quote. Will Labor's interventions create new market opportunities for Russia, China and Iran? And why should Australians take the word of Senator Farrell ahead of one of our largest foreign investors and experts in this field?
Thank you, Senator Birmingham. Your time has expired. Minister Farrell.
Well, Senator
Ciccone. Minister Farrell, please resume your seat. I'm going to wait for silence. Minister Farrell.
Thank you, President, and thanks Senator Birmingham for his question. Well, you can rely on my word. I'm a minister in a fantastic Labor government, and we are all about providing a stable political environment in which to continue to supply reliably Japan gas supplies. In the case of INPEX, that's well, look. In all due respect, I had a very long meeting with the gentleman that you're talking about before that lunch. It was an extremely amicable meeting, at which I made it very clear that this country continues to be a stable, reliable supplier of gas into the Japanese market. And of course, Japan is not the only place we're supplying gas.
Thank you, Minister. The time for answering has expired. Senator Babet.
Thank you, President. My question is for the Minister representing the Treasurer, Minister Gallagher. Minister Gallagher, we meet again. Your October 2022 budget included a figure of $77 million that was in the Services Australia portfolio budget statement. This figure is the allowance for the COVID-19 vaccine claim scheme payouts for 2022-2023. At the time, this represented an 80-fold increase in allocation from the previous federal budget of just $937,000. My office is contacted every single day by people who, in good faith, trusted their government but are now paying for this decision with injury. They are suffering, and some in this place mock them to this day. Can you please update the Senate on the total amount that has been paid out by the COVID-19 vaccine claim scheme this current financial year, please?
Thank you, Senator Babet. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, President. I thank Senator Babet for the question and for his advice ahead of time that he was going to ask a question on this. It greatly assists in being able to provide the information that the senator is seeking. As the senator outlined, the COVID-19 vaccine claims scheme was put in place during the COVID-19 pandemic and after the announcement of the approval of the vaccines and the vaccine program across Australia. The scheme was established as a fit-for-purpose, time-limited claim scheme to respond to the unprecedented circumstances of COVID-19. It was designed to ensure that people who've suffered a recognised adverse event as a direct result of the vaccine, COVID vaccine that is, have faster access to compensation than a costly and complex court process. There are 7 recognised clinical conditions which are eligible under the scheme, which I can go through, but specifically in relation to Senator Babet's question, it's right, there was a provision of $77 million made. Total expenditure as of the 28th of March 2023 is in the order of $7.2 million. That Services Australia, who administer the scheme, has received 3,374 claims under the scheme, and at the moment 126 claims have been approved for that total figure of just around $7.2 million.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Babet, first supplementary.
Thank you, Minister. Now, the TGA's most recent report shows that they've received 137,970 reported adverse events following COVID vaccination. That's the equivalent of 2.5 packed Marvel sports stadiums in Melbourne, big stadium. It appears that the number of claims will continue to grow. Minister, what amounts will your government be allocating to this scheme in the next budget, in the upcoming budget?
Thank you, Senator Babet. Minister.
Thank you, President. I thank Senator Babet for the supplementary. my understanding of the TGA's adverse events report is that they report against a range of possible serious side effects, from lesser serious to more serious, as listed under the adverse events, and not all of those would necessarily be eligible for a claim through this scheme. But in the event that there was increased demand, it is a demand-driven scheme. That is, you can make certain provisions, but if there were, we would meet the costs of the applications, the successful applications that met the terms of the scheme and those 7 conditions. The 7 recognised clinical conditions which are eligible under the scheme. So it isn't really a question of whether we have enough money. It's a demand-driven scheme, and that compensation would be paid.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Babet, second supplementary.
Thank you, Minister. So obviously we've paid billions to pharmaceutical companies, and in return, Australians have been slogged with a huge compensation bill to pay for vax-injured people. What options does the government have to make these companies responsible and pay for the injuries that they created with a crappy product?
Thank you, Senator Babet. Minister.
Thank you, President. Thank you, Senator Babet, for the supplementary. Well, I don't agree with the characterisation of the COVID-19 as a crappy product. It has successfully vaccinated millions and millions of Australians and significantly decreased the chance of serious disease, particularly on vulnerable individuals. So I don't accept that. As to the commercial arrangements with the pharmaceutical companies, I think if people remember at the time, because the vaccine was developed in a relatively short period compared to others, there were commercial discussions about how to manage schemes and claims like this, but I can't go into those details. They are commercial in confidence.
Senator Babet, second supplementary. Oh, done that. Sorry. Senator Marielle Smith.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister for Women, Senator Gallagher. Earlier today, the government's Workplace Gender Equality Amendment, Closing the Gender Pay Gap Bill, was passed with wide support across our parliament. Can the minister update the parliament on how the government is advancing women's economic equality?
Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, President. Thank Senator Smith for the question, and again for all the work she does in relation to gender equality and women's policy in general. I really do appreciate it. It's so fantastic to work with such a great bunch of people and have such a great bunch of women across the Labor caucus. And this piece of legislation, which I accept, and in fact I thank everybody in this chamber, because this is a piece of legislation where the chamber came together as one and agreed that this should be a priority to get this bill passed. It's passed the House of Representatives now, and again it was work that was built upon by the former government, those opposite, who had started the review and agreed to the recommendations. So it is really good at the end of a long and at sometimes scratchy sitting fortnight to be in a position where we have and can demonstrate to the women of Australia that the Parliament has agreed that ending or accelerating action on the gender pay gap is such a critical and important national reform. The bill that passed the House this morning is going to change things. It is going to ensure that at a business level, where a gender pay gap exists, that will be reported and people will be able to see that. It's important from a transparency and accountability reason, but it's also about driving the reform that's needed to close the gender pay gap. There is absolutely no reason why men and women performing the jobs that they do in businesses should be paid differently for the same type of work. And we know that this has a huge impact on gender equality and women's economic independence, or women's economic equality as well.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Smith, first supplementary.
Thank you, Minister. While this bill was being debated, both in the House and the Senate, many of us observed that there was more work to do. Can the minister provide an update on the government's plans to continue to improve gender equality?
Thank you, Senator Smith. Minister.
Thank you, and thanks Senator Smith for the supplementary. Well, there is more work to do, and we are, as a government, committed to getting on with that. As a government, from our early days with the Jobs and Skills Summit and the platform that we took to the election campaign, made clear that women's economic equality, and the issue of gender equality was going to be a priority for this government. We recognised that in October, with our investments that we made in social programs like early education and care to ensure that women can work the hours they want to work, but also through the work we are doing now in progressing the work on a national strategy to achieve gender equality. And I would encourage everyone to get involved in that. We are wanting to hear from women from right across the country and all of the people we represent. Consultations are open. To have those conversations in your communities, with your neighbours, your families and friends about how we can make Australia a leader in the relation to gender equality.
Senator Smith, second supplementary.
Thank you, President. Can the minister outline how we can all contribute to improving gender equality?
Thank you, Senator Smith. Minister.
Thank you, President. I thank Senator Smith for the supplementary. Well, Senator Smith is right. We all have a role to play in this place, in our communities, at home, in businesses, unions, schools, universities, churches, sporting groups. Wherever you are, we can work together and make women's economic equality and gender equality will make us a better country. In this place, we can help drive that change by getting around the table, working together, as we've done on the bill that passed the parliament today. We know that there's a lot more work to do. We've been delivering some of those important additions or investments into driving this change through cheaper childcare, through 10 days paid family and domestic violence leave, boosting paid parental leave, through our gender-responsive budgeting, and in the first budget in nearly a decade that cast a gender lens over the budget. We've got the National Plan to End Violence Against Women and Children, a wage increase for aged care workers where 96% of them are women, National Women's Health Advisory Council. I could go on, President, but
expired. Thank you. Senator Cash.
Thank you very much. My question is to the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Wong. Last week, in your absence, Minister Farrell was asked to name anywhere in Australia where electricity prices had gone down since the Albanese government was elected. Minister Farrell did not name anywhere, but did say, "I don't follow electricity prices closely enough to be able to answer that question." Minister Wong, do you follow electricity prices more closely than Minister Farrell?
You wouldn't have said that.
Minister.
Are you more in touch than
Order.
I always think it's a very dangerous thing when, I'll take the interjection from Senator Birmingham, when politicians tried to compete about these things. But what I would about being in touch, that is, because we're all politicians, aren't we? But I think we understand very acutely the cost of living pressures facing Australian families. And
Senator Ruston.
We understand very acutely the cost of living pressures facing Australian families. Obviously, inflation has driven, for a whole range of reasons, has driven increases in costs. People are feeling it at the supermarket, and they're feeling it in terms of utilities and services. And that is why, those of us on this side, along with the Australian Greens and others, voted for price relief for Australian families. So every time someone from the other side comes in here and tells us about energy price relief, let's remember they voted against energy price relief. That is what the coalition did. You voted against the price cap for coal and gas. You voted against $3 billion in targeted bill relief for businesses and households most in need. You voted against a 12-month price cap on uncontracted gas at $12 a gigajoule and a 12-month price ceiling on domestic coal for New South Wales and Queensland. And then you have the gall to come in here and talk about who's out of touch. Well, no one who is in touch with Australian families and what is happening on cost of living out there would have had the temerity to come into this chamber and vote against price relief for Australian families.
Order.
So if you want to talk about who's not in touch, have a look in the mirror, Senator Cash.
Senator Cash, first supplementary.
Thank you very much. And Minister, can you name anywhere in Australia where electricity prices have gone down since the Albanese government was elected?
Minister.
Well, I know that everywhere in Australia is probably would have had higher prices were you in government.
Exactly.
That's what we do know. And we know that prices have risen by less than they would have as a result of the government's policy, which you voted against.
Order.
And you know, those opposite not only did they vote against price relief, not only did they vote against price relief, they also think that the way you deal with energy price...
Order. It is not appropriate for the noise levels to go... Senator Birmingham, I've called the chamber to order. It is not appropriate for the noise level in here to get so loud that the senator can't hear me calling her to order. It is not appropriate to shout across the chamber on both sides. I would ask senators to listen respectfully. Minister, please continue.
Thank you. Not only do they think, those opposite, President, think that an answer to rising prices is to vote against price relief. Yeah. They think an answer to rising prices is to hide them. Yeah. Hide them. Before the last election, their response to rising energy prices was
Senator
just
McGrath.
not let's change what the DMO actually is disclosed to be. That's what Mr Taylor did. Well, we on this side understand what families are facing, and we're trying to do something about it.
Minister. Your time has expired. Senator Cash, first supplementary.
Final supplementary. Why hasn't, Minister, the Prime Minister delivered on his promise to reduce electricity bills by $275, a promise that he made 97 times prior to the election? Why does everything always cost more under Labor?
Order. 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 Before, Minister, I haven't called you. Before I call the Minister, Senator Polley. Senator Polley, I'm calling you to order. It doesn't require a response. Minister, please. Minister, please continue.
Let's talk about the default market offer that the Australian Energy Regulator published, the draft DMO for 23-24. And what that showed, and this is what's happening to energy prices, that the DMO will rise up to 22% for households, up to 25.4% for businesses. That is a substantial increase. But what it also showed is without coal and gas price caps that you voted against, the price increase would have been 51% and 53%. 51% and 53%. That's what they would.
Please resume your seat. It is, Senator Cash, it is not appropriate to interject in such a loud voice as to try and outcompete the minister. She's been asked a question, she's entitled to answer it, and she's entitled to senators listening respectfully and silently. Minister, please continue.
I'll just repeat that without the coal and gas price caps that those opposite voted against, the price increases that Australians would have faced, households and businesses, would have been 51% and 53% respectively. Yeah. So if anybody wants to come in here and suggest they're out of touch, I suggest they ought to, those opposite should look in a mirror, and I ask the President that further questions be placed on notice.
Order. Order.